think without further ado, then we'll jump to questions. I'm not going to put you on the hot seat and ask you how to fix my Florida Gator football team. It won't be that tough. Thank you for your time. I would say to the league, and Mr. Steele will appreciate this. Sunday, I was noodling in my mind. What questions do I want to ask? What are the things I'm thinking about? And so I started jotting them down, as is typical of the league, so very well informed. I went from my list of jotted down questions to the list they had as well.
Right.
And I said, well, they've already have 95% of them, so there's very little I need to add except be.
You know the women are going to get the work done.
Yeah, so I said, without further ado, thank you for your time, Mr. Steele. And we'll start with that. We'll try to get as many questions in as we can. And all of these questions were submitted by members of the League of Women Voters. So in light of recent legislation moving forward, elections appear to be in danger of partisan manipulation and deliberate voter suppression. One asks, do you see any way to legally counteract these new laws in order to be sure our 2022 elections are fair?
Great question. Well, first off, let me just say what a treat it is to be here with the league in Florida. I've had the pleasure of meeting with members of the league in a number of states over the years, and I've just always been profoundly impressed by the work that you do that is largely unsung, rarely recognized, except for that spotlight when you host a debate, a national debate. Everyone's like, oh, okay, the league, and everybody gets all funky and crazy about the partisan connections where there are none. That's politics. But folks like myself know what you do and are incredibly appreciative of it. I love the energy of your president, Steele. It's just that great commitment to service, and all of you for being here for a little bit of this conversation today. So the reality that we're faced with right now is appreciating the reality we're in. A lot of folks like to sort of think that this too shall pass. Well, it may, but it's going to take a few people out along the way. It will take a few institutions out along the way if we as citizens aren't careful about that, and if we aren't the watchdogs that the founders intended us to be. What you see happening now in a number of legislatures around the country are what I would view, and it's particularly difficult as a Republican to see it emanate from members of my own party. What I would understand to be, and I think what a lot of Americans see as an attack on the institution of voting because we didn't like the outcome of the last election. Look, we have always played this game rough. We've always played it tough. There are winners and losers. I can't begin to recount to you the number of elections that I've lost as a candidate, the number of elections that I've lost with candidates that I've supported and worked with over the years, many years, going back to my time as a county chairman in Prince George's County, Maryland. So if you want to understand what my job was like, I live in a county of 800 and some thousand individuals, of whom there are roughly 60,000 registered Republicans. And I was the proud county chairman, right? But we got some things done because we made the case to the voters about things that matter to them on policy, like taxes and property and things like that. I've seen it also in my role as the state party chairman in Maryland, where we, again, face a uphill battle from a political standpoint. I'm in a state, a blue state, right, of Democrats and Republicans, where we're outnumbered 2-to-1, right? There are twice as many Democrats as there are Republicans, and yet we right now have a Republican governor who's serving his second term in office because he made the case to the people, despite the losses and the battles that had come before, the times that we were up against it. We did not, say the system was broken and corrupt and therefore let's change the rules so that we could fix a win. We re-engaged, we re-emerged better and stronger in the kind of candidates and messages that we wanted to give and put in front of the voters. And we had success. And I saw that as a national chairman. As I traveled the country, having been newly elected a week after Barack Obama took the oath of office, he's sitting down there on Pennsylvania Avenue with a 70% job approval. And I'm now the chairman of a party that had just lost the presidential race, had his clock cleaned in 2006 off-year cycle, lost incredible number of seats in the House. The Democrats have the majority in the Senate, the majority in the House and the White House, and they elect me chairman. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And yet we made the case to the American people about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. And I was told, I can't tell you the number of times that we would not prevail, we would not be successful because the odds were stacked against us. And yet we made that case and we prevailed, as you heard from the numbers. So this idea, folks, that we need to engage in the kind of behavior we're seeing legislatively and electorally from some of our fellow citizens, to me speaks to a greater danger, because this is not just about winning an election. There's got to be something else more there. And we as citizens need to find out and understand what that is.
What's the greater danger?
Well, the greater danger is that we become much more of a nation of us versus them. If you don't agree with me, I don't like you. It's not like I don't like you because you hit my mama, right? I don't like you because you said something that I disagreed with, or you are not of the right tribe. That's not what this country has ever been about. We got ugly. We can talk about over 400 years in this country. We know that, right? But think about how we prevailed in spite of that, right? Think about how we have figured out as African Americans, Hispanics, whites, Latinos, conservative, liberal, independent, how we've kind of made this crazy experiment work, right? Without turning on each other. My concern now, the ugly bit, Michael, is that we find it easier to turn on each other. It is easier to turn on each other. And where I draw the line and why I have such a hard time is when political leadership are the ones who are convincing people to turn on each other. They're not leaders. They are cowards. They are grifters because there's money in it. There's money in it. I can go out and call you a bastard and raise $3 million, right? And so instead of being repulsed by that political behavior, we are leaning into it and we're writing checks for it.
How do we, and I'm fully aware about MPBIC, but I think you're setting the predicate for that a few questions ahead. But a lot of people argue in a purple state that really a lot of political analysts argue is really more of a red state now in Florida. How do they affect change? One of the League of Women Voters questions was, the Florida legislature passed and the governor signed new restrictive voting laws this year. The league does not support these restrictions. I suspect this question was written before last week, when the governor also proposed even more, including a statewide police force dedicated to seeking out any election fraud. How do you suggest we frame our discussions with these Florida Republican House and Senate members to change their minds and votes in a state that the governor's mansion is occupied by a Republican, as you well know, the House and Senate? And is there any way for the league or for others to affect change, and how do they begin if indeed that is a goal that they think is attainable? I have mad respect for the league's impartiality on these matters, and don't want to say anything that will get the league in trouble, okay? Because I know your mission is not to engage in partisan politics. But I'm going to give you a very partisan answer to this question. But I just want, for the record, to be clear, I'm not saying something that reflects any member of this league or the league itself, one way or the other. Okay, so just so we're all very clear. Unelect them. I'm sorry, folks. Why do you see the ultimate power that you have as citizens? That when you see elected officials, state police to police voting? Since when and for what reason? What the hell is the governor so afraid of? What is so corrupt under his leadership of the state
under the leadership of the legislators in the state, that they have to create a police force to what? To intimidate voters. That's what. I'm sorry. That is the most harebrained, ridiculous thing I've heard. It is ridiculous, and the governor should know better.
What about?
Let me finish my point.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. I'm so infuriated because no one thinks they can stand up against that stupid. You have the power because you own the vote. And the fact that they want to put restrictions on that vote tells you how much power you have. I am so proud of the representative here, Joseph, who's out here, Joe Geller, just for the first time had a quick conversation. He's on the front line trying to open up the system, and you've got elected officials trying to shut it down. That's not what leadership is about. Leadership should never be afraid to the point that their actions lead to intimidation, rigging the system against citizens who want to fully participate. Florida is a great political landscape, has a great political history. But I'm telling you, folks, the landscape outside your state is changing. There's a new dog on the block, and her name is Texas. And Texas is going to change the political landscape in this country when it becomes a battleground state. And I'm predicting that happens probably in the next political cycle. That's how close. You've watched the trend lines where Republicans are getting fewer and fewer of the statewide vote in presidential elections. Mitt Romney got 19%, won Texas by 19%, right? Donald Trump won it the first time in 2016 by something like 12%. Guess how much he won Texas by in 2020? 5.5. You don't see that trend line? And if they Democrats get a strong candidate on the ballot in 2024, like a Beto O'Rourke, who has a lot of play with independent voters and some Republican voters in Texas, on a presidential ballot, what do you think is going to happen for the Republicans? If a Republican loses Texas, there's not a map on the planet that wins them the White House. They're Florida, Michigan, Ohio. You can win Florida, Michigan, Ohio, Arizona, Nevada. You can win every other state you can come up with, and you still don't get to 270. That's how much the political landscape is changing, and is changing faster because of actions like we're just discussing. When you respond out of fear because you have nothing more to say to voters and you have no solutions for governing, these are the kinds of tactics that you see, and it's unfortunate, and I'm begging my party to stop it and engage voters honestly and let citizens do what citizens want to do, get their ballots, go place those ballots and vote.
It is noteworthy that Republicans in Florida are now rightly boasting that their voter registration has eclipsed that of Democrats. I would ask too, if Governor DeSantis or a number of Republicans were sitting here, they would say, what are you scared of? We want to make sure it is one man, one woman. I should say one woman, one man vote.
Mm-hmm.
And that the fact of the matter is we're just trying to make sure that the rules are in place, whether that's tightening up drop boxes or absentee ballots.
Was there a problem before?
In fact, the governor boasted in 2020 that it was one of the best run elections in Florida.
That's what I recall him saying.
In the nation, excuse me. Yeah. He said Florida was an exemplar for the
We're
nation.
exemplary for the nation, and yet now you're so afraid that you're going to need a police for voting. Look, the reality of it is, so what? You got the majority of the vote, right? There are more Republicans than Democrats. Guess what? That was the case in Virginia too at one point. And yeah, we won the party won the race in Virginia, but look how the race was won in Virginia. It was not run scaring voters and talking about, Joe Biden lost the election and January 6th was just a walk in the park. It was common sense everyday issues that we used to talk about. So the reality, oh, there goes my button.
I do that all the time.
This button, by the way, has been hanging on for 2 days. And I was going to see how long it was going to hang on because I'm a man. And instead of just taking the needle and thread and fixing it like my mama taught me,
you thought you'd coax it.
I just let it do its thing and it did its thing. It fell off. But just the final point on that. So I get that, and that's great. I'm happy for Republicans in the state, but understand this. As Texas goes, so goes presidential elections. That's your new reality. Now, you can dance on your numbers all day long, but you need to look around what's happening in other states and how those demographics are changing. And so this is why, I've gotten behind an effort like National Popular Vote, because it allows for a level playing field where we can compete around ideas, we can compete around issues that matter to citizens, as we saw play out in the state of Virginia recently. And it gives us, Republicans, a fighting chance in the future as those landscapes change, and you don't then become subject to the wiles and whims of what happens in another state. And finally, for smaller states, it also elevates the game for them, who are now hamstrung by this winner-take-all system that we have. Why? Because no presidential candidate goes to their state. A presidential candidate is not going to fly into Delaware to do an event. They're not going to come to Maryland to do an event. Heck, they're not even going to go to California if they're Republican or Democrat, because there's no incentive electorally to go there. The Democrat knows I'm going to win the state. Okay, ta-da, I'll go and fly and get some cash. Republican knows I'm not going to win the state. Ta-da, I'll fly and get some cash and leave. And I'll head to Florida, I'll head to Ohio with that money and spend it there.
You've one of the key questions was why you support it. You've begun to talk about that. I'd like you to amplify that comment. This group I know is familiar with the National Popular Voting Interstate Compact, so we don't need to spend a lot of time on the mechanics because it's such a learned group. But one comment we did get a specific question is one comment we get, a league questioner asked, is when talking to Republicans is that if MPVs implemented, Republicans would never get elected.
Oh, that's just
their question.
Well, you don't get elected if you don't try, right? If you don't engage voters, sure, you're not going to get elected. Look, I've got to give shout out to Kathleen Crampton, who's been leading the effort here, working very hard across the state, making the case, making that, addressing those very points, making the case for National Popular Vote, and trying to get people to understand that's just not how it works. That is such an easy one of, oh, we'll never win again if we get National Popular Vote. Well, you're not going to win if you don't engage voters, period, right? And right now, presidential candidates do not engage voters. We have a Medicaid Part D. Why? Why? Because of the I-4 corridor. That is the only reason why we have it. We have No Child Left Behind. Why? Because of suburban moms in Ohio. That's why. We have federal disaster aid coming to specific states. Why? Because they're battleground states. That's what our politics have become. I love to tell the story about, speaking of federal disaster relief, when we had during the Obama administration, the oil spill in the Gulf, right? It wasn't a national calamity where federal aid was put in, resources were put to work until the first drop of oil reached the shores of Florida. It had already landed up in Louisiana and else in Texas. But when it got to Florida, Obama goes on television and starts saying, hey, we got a problem here. We got to address this issue. That's not how this should work. No candidate for the office nor president in office should tailor make their policies to a select group of individuals. We're all citizens. Yeah, now it's something, well, you got the benefit of, No Child Left Behind, but that's not how it works. It just isn't how we should be doing public policy. And so this idea that we have to somehow retreat and stay in this cocoon of winner take all kind of political strategy, it's just not benefiting small states. It's not benefiting larger states. Look, the reality for America right now is that the 100 biggest cities in the country, right? The 100 largest cities hold 59 million people. The rural areas of our nation, all the rural areas added up, guess how many? 59 million people, right? So the battle for voters, guess where it is? In the suburbs of America. That's the new battleground. That's the new frontier. And so those suburbs exist in small states like Delaware and Maine, and in big states like Texas and California. Look, we don't get a presidential visit at all in my state of Maryland. We have 10 electoral votes, but our electoral votes are just as important as anyone else's. And so we're looking for, which is why we were the first state to sign up in the compact. We're looking for people to recognize the opportunity here, that we all get a chance to participate fully and not, wind up electing the president of the battleground states as opposed to the president of the United States.
We want to turn, we've got about 10 minutes, and we want to get you on your way to your keynote, and you'll hear a lot more about MPV during the keynote, but redistricting, of course, going on right now in Florida and elsewhere. And people talk about one question of the process of redistricting, congressional seats taking place. Give us your thoughts. And that dovetails to another question. The league's always fighting, one questioner says, for fair and competitive districts. Here in Florida, we've worked with partners to pass constitutional amendments designed to block gerrymanders. Are there other states where you think this highly political process is being conducted to build competitive districts, this questioner asked, that can dissuade politicians from focusing on that narrow base of voters?
Yeah, the redistricting piece is a real challenge. I still laugh, but I used to laugh a lot when dealing with redistricting, because I would always say, yeah, redistricting never was an issue when Democrats held the House of Representatives for 40 years. No one was talking about redistricting between 1954 and 1994, right? It wasn't until after Republicans started winning majorities in the House, everyone was like, oh, they're gerrymandering the districts. We've been gerrymandering districts since the 1800s. So that's part of the political process. I think, though, what we have learned and come to realize is that gerrymandering has led to not an improvement in government leadership and government service, but a retrenchment in that regard, because now our members in the House, for example, are playing to a smaller audience of issues and individuals, voters. So I've been very excited about seeing the number of states, my own state included, that have begun to work with commissions and citizen organizations, independent organizations that are reviewing redistricting. But here's my bottom line. No system or program will be an effective system and program in redistricting unless and until you remove every elected official from the process. They should not be allowed to draw lines to find the voters they want. They should be fully independent commissions of judges or former judges, former elected officials, but very few of them. But primarily you, citizens, men and women who are the subject of that gerrymandering, who get pushed in and out of districts willy-nilly. You should have a say. And why do I say that? Because we are already empowered by our founders to act in that regard. Because our government of, by, and for people are founded by we the people, not some institution, not a political party. In fact, our founders abhorred political parties. They called them factions back in the day. They didn't want any parts of it because they saw them as the ruin of this great enterprise. Well, they weren't too off about that. So I think if we're going to be serious as a nation going forward about issues like gerrymandering, then we need to take control of that process. And it goes back to the point I was making earlier, elect individuals who understand the value of that proposition of having a fully independent process every 10 years to look at where the line should be drawn, so we don't have lines drawn like in my state that resemble a dead pterodactyl.
We'd like to get to two more questions. One, and I'll save it for last. I hear all the time from people who walk up to me, but I'm going to save that one. I know it's one on so many minds. We'll begin with one, though. Do you have suggestions for ways to support conscientious supervisors of election who fall under attack by partisan extremists? So many election officials are quitting in fear and frustration. We're losing administrative know-how. Indeed, in Florida, there was a bipartisan cry among election officials. Why are we changing so many election laws? That wasn't just that Republican or Democrat, that was across the board in our 67 counties. But people are really worried. And to that question, how do you support election officials? How do you keep the brain drain from people who said, I give up, I'm out of here?
We need these men and women in public service. And it is some of the hardest work you can ever imagine in public service, because it touches on such a sensitive issue, voting, and your rights that are attended to by the act of voting. So that means the system that they stand over has to be protected all the time. It has to be safeguarded. The rules have to be fair, because if you don't trust that process, if you don't trust their leadership, then it all begins to unravel. We as individuals have to figure out how best we help reinforce them. We saw a little bit of that in Georgia with Secretary Raffensperger, where citizens and community interest, organizations like the League, democracy organizations, stood up and said, no, time out. That helped strengthen them, gave them the courage to stand against the tide that was coming in to fix the election. And so it's very, very hard. There's no doubt about it. I've talked to a lot of these secretaries over the last year, one-on-one and in group settings, and they are frustrated. They are afraid. A lot of them have been threatened, their families, they themselves. And we have to get to the point sooner rather than later that we don't tolerate that.
Well, let me ask you the final question. I'd ask, after I ask this question, I'd ask for a show of hands. How many of you have asked a variation of this to yourself, to your loved one, your children, your neighbor? This is the question, last question. Have we turned the corner in politics so that we'll never again be able to carry on civil, sane discussions between the parties? Has the horse left the stable forever? Do you foresee actual conflict arising again? Are we on the brink of a civil war? I hear variations on those concerns a lot from people, if not quite to that level of concern. How many of you hear a variation of that all the time? How many of you worry about it? Answer those concerns to the degree you can.
Yeah, I hear it a lot. I worry about it even more. I think that there's some folks out there who actually want that fight. I had one gentleman earlier this year that I had a conversation with, bragging that a civil war was coming. And I, kind of looked at him and thought to myself, why does that make you happy? How do you think that ends? Because it doesn't end well for this nation at all. We know the horrors and the difficulties that such an action can bring about. And as I'll say in here and I'll say out in the larger program, we are where we are because this is where we want to be. And we'll be here as long as we want to be here. And the moment we no longer want to be here, guess what? We're not. That's the power we have. And I cannot emphasize and implore enough to you as citizens, as activists, as leaders, that you have greater sway and control over this than you may realize. I love the saying that, don't let the bastards get you down, right? Don't let the bastards get you down. You do have power here. Right mind, right attitude, better angels can prevail. The thing that's in front of us does not have to be fed or given more energy in life if we don't want it to have it. And we have to decide how that plays itself out. That's what the League is all about. You have been a voice for women's suffrage from the very beginning, right? You've been a voice for open elections and fair and free debates forever. Why would you walk away from that leadership? Why would you walk away from that responsibility? Partisan edges and divides respected still does not diminish the importance of your voice, right? It still doesn't diminish the importance of your leadership. So I'm looking in this, what I term the democracy space, for citizens to stand up and say, this is not who we are. And that's why I press so much about elected representation, because that elected leader is a reflection of you. And we all know the politician that we elected then does not resemble anything remotely to what we're hearing out of them now. So why do we tolerate that? I elected you to office for a reason, a specific reason, to express values and principles that are closer to this, not just me personally, you're a member of my tribe, but because it reflected this community and the aspirations of the community. So why do you sound like you've lost your friggin' mind 4 years, 8 years later? And I think that's going to be the delicate balance for us as we confront a lot of these big issues, like, voting, as well as, all the various features that go into that.
An excellent prelude to your keynote remarks, Michael Steele.
Thank you, guys.